This is Nick Storr once again for Sound on Sound magazine. This time around we're going to take a look at the various ways that you can interact with groups of tracks in a Reaper session, either through summing the audio together or by grouping and manipulating the track faders and other controls together. And we'll culminate looking briefly at VCA Faders, which are the latest addition to this arsenal of workflow tools. First though, let's have a look at buses. This is a session where the various instrument groups have been assigned to bus tracks, which I've placed at the top of the session. So you can see, there's a reasonable number of tracks in play here, but so we can control it in broader strokes, I've mapped them all to these buses here: drums, synths and keys, guitars, orchestral, and vocals. So you can see as I play through the song, I can manipulate and mix the elements in groups just by moving these top few faders. Let's just play a few seconds and I'll move the faders around. You can see what I mean. So you get the general idea. Now, the way you set this up in Reaper is by using track sends. So let's say I look at my kick drum send here, kick drum track here rather, and I click on the send in the mixer here, and it's just a send at unity gain to the drums bus, which then makes that appear up the top here. You'll also notice that it's got the master parent send switched off. So if I click on routing, this little checkbox here is switched off entirely, which means it's going directly to the bus, and then the bus sends it to the master fader here, rather than it going to both places at once. Now, if you've got a lot of tracks in your session, that's a pretty tedious way to do it. So by far the faster approach here is to use a routing matrix. It's option R. We'll bring up the routing matrix, and or Alt R on the PC. And you can see here, if I go to that same kick track, the master parent is switched off here, and this one is checked here, which you can see at the top here assigns it to the drums bus. And you can see as you work down the tracks, I've got everything else assigned in the same way. So that's buses. Now here's the same session again, arranged into the same basic sections, but this time using folder tracks. It's all fully set up except for this drum kit section here, which I'll just do now as a demonstration. Simple as, all you need to do is insert a new track above the group. We'll name it drums, and then you just multi-select all the tracks you want to put into the folder and drag it up. Boom. And it is really as simple as that. Now, from an audio standpoint, this is pretty much doing exactly the same thing as buses, but rather than using sends to route the signal into tracks, we're nesting them inside these folders, which automatically sums their output together as well as visually organizing them. And you can see if we play through that these master or folder parents basically do the same thing as the buses were doing in the previous example. Now, as well as allowing you to mix groups of tracks together, track folders are also a really great way to tame an unruly arrange page. If you click on these little buttons here in the track parents, you can see that you can really compact the view of the tracks and declutter the timeline quite well. So if I do that to all of my tracks here, you can see that's the entire session. It's all on the page there. I can still play through it. I can adjust my various folders and sort of interact with it well. And if I need to get in to do more intricate work, I can just pop that open, work on it, and then close it up again. Now, one thing you may have noticed in my playthrough using both folder tracks and buses is that the post fader sends on child tracks don't follow the parent fader movement. So like if I go to the introduction here and play through and turn down the guitar folder, you can still hear the ghost of the guitar leaking through the reverb return. Now, there are ways to work around this, but it's worth bearing in mind. Also, of course, sort of intrinsic to folders is that they do link the routing and the visual organization of your track layout, so it does force you to lay your session out in a specific way. So far, we've looked at routing methods to group tracks, and now we're going to move on to ways to actually control tracks together without affecting the audio routing at all. I've expanded the mixer out here on the left so you can see a bit more clearly what we're doing there. The simplest way to achieve this is to simply multi-select the tracks that you want to control together and move the fader. I'll demonstrate here with this drum kit. You just click on the first track, which I've just done there, then you hold down Shift and click on the last track in that group to select them all together. And then you can see if I move the fader on any one of those, all the other faders in that selection move along with it, maintaining their relative balance. Now, it's a quick and dirty way to adjust groups without having any other more complex routing or grouping set up in this session. So now we'll check out track groups. Briefly, track grouping is a way to set up controller relationships between tracks. So once again, I've set this session up to control those same 5 sections, and you'll probably notice it looks not entirely unlike our buses example with these 5 sort of control tracks up here. But the difference predominantly is we're not actually routing any audio. I'll switch to a full screen mixer view so that you can see a bit more clearly. So as I move the various control tracks here, I'll just grab the drum one here, for example, you can see that the faders in the session actually move along with it, correspondingly, just like when we had them multi-selected in the last example. Same here with guitars, keyboards, and so on and so forth. So we're not actually touching the routing at all. So that issue we had previously with the post-fade effects sends, not an issue at all. Everything works just exactly as it should. So let's have a look at how that's set up. I'm going to select one of the control tracks here. We'll go with drums again and hit Shift G to bring up the grouping window. Now you can see it's assigned to the drums group, and all of these boxes are ticked here in the left column. So it's assigned as the control master for all of those actions. Now if I select the drum tracks themselves, that's where are we? Kick down to mono room and hit Shift G again, you can see it's a member of the same group, but we've got all the slave channels ticked, which means it's acting as a slave and receiving those control messages from the drum master over here. I'm just going to pop back over to the arrange window here so you can see one slight problem with track groups when it comes to using them with automation. Let's set our drum track automation mode to touch and just record a basic volume move here. Now you can see it's also recorded that volume envelope to all of the slave tracks, which is potentially pretty untidy. Now in this instance, that's because we set up a master-slave relationship for automation mode between those tracks. As you can see here, automation mode master. But if I, for example, put automation mode back to trim read, then turn that off. So there's now no longer a relationship. That's not a master for automation mode. So then I switch the automation mode here to touch. The drum tracks are all still in the default trim read, and then I try and do the same thing. Then you'll see that our group master automation has absolutely no effect on the slave tracks at all, which is also not ideal. So what do? We use Reaper's latest group control tool, VCA Faders. Here's the same session, only rather than the traditional track grouping, I've set it up to use VCAs. Let's have a look at the track grouping settings for our drum master again by pressing Shift G. You can see the only box ticked on the left-hand column here is the VCA master, and you'll see that our slave tracks are set up correspondingly on the other side there. And in the mixer, you notice that the master isn't actually controlling the faders there, but on playback, that it does in fact regulate the volume from the slaves. Now what this means in effect is if we repeat our automation trick from before, set our automation mode to touch, and then I try and record a move, the slave tracks are affected by the automation on that master track, but because we're not actually moving the controls on the slaves, you don't get that messy duplication of envelope data. So there's a quick tour of some of the pros and cons of the various different summing and grouping methods available in Reaper. I'll see you next time.